Well, I think it's a well-known fact that the Trump presidency has been a disaster for the U.S. economy. I can't turn on National Public Radio without hearing myself reminded of that fact. And so imagine my surprise. By the way, I'm Scott Ott with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. My surprise at reading a headline that says, and I'll read it to you exactly, April was best month in history for U.S. budget, according to the Trump administration spokesperson lying Sarah Sanders? No, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. Yes, in fact, the United States not only brought in a record amount of revenue in the month of April, but the gap between revenue and spending was also a record surplus. Now, with the appropriate caveats, April is always the biggest revenue month, or usually the biggest revenue month, because that's when the tax bills come due. And I'll also stipulate that it's not because we have done a bunch of budget cutting in the Trump administration so far, because actually spending is up. But the gap between spending and revenues is down. And I'll stipulate one more thing. It's not because of the tax cuts, because the tax cuts haven't really hit yet. We're talking about income earned in 2017. But Stephen Green, you know what it sounds like it is about? It's about a pretty darn good economic year in 2017, because the initial studies of this data indicate that the reason why tax revenues were so high in April of 2018 is because people made a lot more money, 13% more.
Isn't that telling? I love this. We spent 8 years under Obama. You know, Bush's economy wasn't all that great either, but you know, Bush was a big tax and spend guy himself. We had 8 years, at least under Obama, of this horrible wage stagnation. Coming out of the Great Recession, of course, we expected that. But the extent to which Uncle Sam just sitting on his fat ass on top of the economy and just squeezing the life out of all of us was unprecedented. It was the worst post-war recovery under Barack Obama, and we know why. We know why. When you talk down business, when you raise taxes, when you regulate, when you unleash the EPA to wage war on business and consumers, yes, that's exactly what happens. And yet we find ourselves surprised every time that you take the shackles off the economy. Boom, people start making more money, spending more money, earning more money. That's what it's all about. And the best part is that nothing helps us paper over our differences like getting rich. You know, race relations were better under Reagan, they were better under Clinton than they were under Obama. Not because these were, you know, white men that were supposed to, you know, be oppressing minorities or anything like that, but because the country was making crap loads of money, and so we didn't care so much. We don't get small until we start feeling the pinch, or at least not most of us. And we had 8 years of just pinching us and dividing us and all the rest. But let me give you a little statistic. Going into the 1984 election, we had 10 months of economic growth that were the best, I believe, in the entire post-war period. In those 10 months, personal incomes, real take-home pay, increased the first 10 months in 1984 by 7.3, if I remember correctly, percent. It was somewhere between 7 and 8% in less than a year. That was the headwind. That was the real headwind that Walter Mondale was running up against. It wasn't so much Reagan's personality. It was that Reagan was delivering the goods. Now, the Democrats are expecting to get this blue wave in November. But if 2017 is any kind of indication, these tax receipts, if they're any kind of indication of the economy we're going to get over these next 6 months before the election, you can wave bye-bye to that blue wave.
Well, Bill Whittle, I don't happen to subscribe to the theory that presidents have this great big knob that they have in the White House where they can dial up the economy or dial it back. And I know a lot of times the reporting seems like that, as like, Obama did this and we crashed, Reagan did that and we surged and stuff like that. I do believe presidents have an effect, have an impact, but I think there are a lot of factors going on at the same time. But it's interesting from a political perspective that in this very same week that we get the news that the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, says we had the biggest revenue month and the biggest surplus month in history, that Nancy Pelosi is recorded saying that one of the main objectives that she would have, if placed back in the Speaker of the House seat, is in dialing back the Republican tax cuts. Now, originally, Bill, I stipulated that I don't think the Republican tax cuts have kicked in enough yet to have had an effect on 2017 revenues. They certainly didn't. But Bill, economics is not a coldly rational business. It's a psychological and emotional business in which people build in expectations to their expenditures. And I think you probably do this as a small business person. If you think things are going to get better, you start to loosen up the bands of the budget a little bit.
Yep.
Do the Democrats just not understand this, or do they just have a death wish for November?
Well, do not let me get away from that question about not understanding it. I just want to say in the beginning, though, what you were mentioning about the president not having a big dial to adjust the economy. You're right. The economy, all of the economy, any economy, is essentially a confidence scheme, right? I'm going to give you a piece of paper, and you're going to give me something like a car, or it's a big piece of paper, but you get the idea. So it's all dependent on trust. It's all dependent on some level, on some form of optimism. So even though they can say, well, the tax cuts hadn't kicked in yet, what had kicked in was the unleash the dogs. What had kicked in was the was the sense that we have a businessman now, and that this is not going to be 8 years of recovery summer and 1% annual economic growth. What Donald Trump did do right off the bat is say things like, yeah, for every regulation you're going to add, you have to remove 2. And for people who run a business, it's like, really? Yeah, really. And then the tax cut, which is enormous. I think the revenues next year are going to be bigger. In fact, I think the whole future, based on what Steve said, is going to be tied to whether or not there is enough time for the economic benefits of this tax cut to hit people by November first week. That's to me the issue. But I do want to just say one thing about this, Steve and Scott. There's something that's just so crystal clear to me. And you asked, do they not see it? Do the Democrats not see it? I would ask myself, California has was probably the second highest tax rates in the country. The tax rates are so high that businesses are leaving. Businesses are leaving, so California decides that they have to raise taxes in order to keep their revenues up because it's a smaller tax base. And I ask myself forever and ever and ever, how is it these people don't see it? How can they not see it? Then suddenly, like a lightning bolt, it's like, oh, they see it. They just don't care. They don't care. It doesn't matter to them that businesses leave the state. As long as they get their pensions, as long as they get their power, as long as they get all their retirement plans and all the rest of it, they don't care. It doesn't matter to them. It's not like they don't see it. They don't care. Nancy Pelosi, as an example, doesn't care if the tax rate goes up or down, and she doesn't care if they get a tax cut either, because that's only $1,000, and that kind of peanuts, scraps are for the hoi polloi. So yes, they understand it. Of course they understand it. They don't have to, they're not hit by it, and they don't care. This is what we do. We're Democrats. We raise taxes so we can give it to people. So look, the reason she has to raise taxes and the reason she has to maintain this is because the entire Democratic Party is very simple. It's the only business that they do. It's the only economy that the Democrats have, and that's the only one they understand. You give me your vote, and I will give you money, and that's how it works. And it's a very simple economy on the Democratic side. Nothing about competition, none of that stuff. Just you give me your vote, I'll give you some money.
I do think that there's an extent to which the expectations game is what shapes the economy. And I think Bill and Steve are both right in this scenario. And I think Nancy Pelosi, it's hard for me to imagine somebody who's been able to hold on to the reins of power for so many years within her party. It seems so clueless when it comes to what seems like an obvious issue. But the Democrats, historically, when times are bad, the Democrats will say, times are bad. The government needs to spend more money. When times are good, the Democrats will say, times are good. How can the richest country in the world not spend more money on these poor, needy people? And so it really doesn't matter which way the economy's going. The answer is we've got to spend more money. And by spending more money, what they mean is we, the people in power, need to be the conduits of that money. So it's not really, hey, that guy on the street needs greater help. It is, he needs to see Nancy Pelosi as his savior. And I think the difference with Republicans, or at least Republicans historically as they should be, a lot of them have gone over to the dark side, but the Republican Party really should be the ones who stand for, yes, we want the poor to get help, but we don't want to have them look to us for that help. We want them to look to their own resources and to their own families and to their own communities. We want to build stronger communities in that way. So for Nancy Pelosi's tin ear, in the same week, to come out and say, yeah, we want to jack up taxes when the economy has already built in the expectation that that 4% growth rate of GDP that Donald Trump was predicting before looks like it's well on its way to happening, I think is a not just a tactical error, it's a strategic blunder. And despite all the news to the contrary, I think it's going to cost the Democrats dearly in the midterm elections. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I am Scott Ott. Thank you to the members of BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.